Plenty. Salt plus charcoal from Sunhead 2018. I'm Aurian Archive, and this is Hybrid Theory, and once again, we're getting back on deck with the Steam Deck. We're going to try and pick up where we left off for the past 2 days. Again, I'm shooting to try and keep this stream around an hour. So hopefully this should be nice for your podcasting formats or whatever if you're just listening to this someplace else, or you just need a little bit of background information. And to recap pretty much from the last stream, Valve isn't telling us anything. We have questions about the chipset. There is no boost mode because there's no method to exhaust extra heat. The thermal system is already designed for the maximum heat output the processor APU can achieve. We talked about additive performance over Type-C. Specifically, we don't know if Valve has a license to the RDNA architecture and can make their own chips in a foundry that Valve either owns or subcontracts to. We talked about why an additive performance would be a good option for future Steam Decks or in general. And we talked about whether or not the Steam Deck itself is a performance baseline. Can there be other Steam Decks using different hardware? We talked about, isn't Thunderbolt an Apple Intel thing? Well, Apple and Intel have kind of split. Thunderbolt is now more in line with the USB specification. Now, how much of that is a USB working group, Intel, AMD, and all of the USB implementers working together, or whoever is taking lead? It's just, we're pretty confident at this point Apple's done with Thunderbolt. What Apple will do to replace it on the forthcoming M2 processors, I don't know. Is the Steam Deck a PlayStation 4? Went over that. We talked a little bit about the processor capabilities. We talked about why the back end is so important, the actual raster operation pipeline, and how using Vulkan threading, and to a certain extent this also does apply to DirectX 12, how using threading to the graphics processors you can more highly optimize a limited unit processor to better achieve a specific performance target. Which, okay, it does require massive changes to how graphics are approached, but you'd be making those changes anyways, especially if you're targeting a mobile platform where you will very likely within the next 2 or 3 or even the next generation of compute devices from Samsung, who has licensed RDNA 2, will likely see big.little style GPUs coming from Samsung as soon as next year. So, and then we kind of Vulkan, what can't you do? Well, because Vulkan is a low-level API, it's the closest you can get to bare metal with an API. There's a lot of things you can do. I can't think of something that can't be done or something that isn't being worked on. Now, getting Vulkan to work like it can work can be as difficult as making OpenGL behave. And again, this requires additional training, this requires additional research, and a lot of publishers simply don't want to go through that work. Or pay for that work. They've already got developers that are trained in one method that doesn't work very well, but they're trained in it, so that's what they use. Yes, you could probably make an entire Dilbert cartoon out of that. And then we had the overarching slide where we talked a little bit about Steam machines. In previous live streams, I've talked about how Steam Deck is the anti-Steam machine that directly attacks everything that went wrong with Steam machines. And we talked a little bit about the Steam Link. Nothing really went wrong with it. It was just a terminal product, in that it was a product that already shared a wide range of crossover functionality with pre-existing and forthcoming products. And then we dug into developers and publishers not being interested in profits. A basic economics lesson, and we'll shrink this slide down a bit to make it all fit into one shot. And I noted towards the end that only Microsoft, out of all of the publishers and developers seems to be treating gaming as a long-tailed economic model from an economic perspective. Microsoft's the only one that's really saying our back catalog is worth something. We're going to put our back catalog on our current machines, and we're going to do it now, and we're going to do it going forward. Once you've bought an Xbox game, it's an Xbox game. You will be able to play it. I mean, that's a phenomenal change of turn. I directly credit Satya Nadella for letting Phil Spencer run the Xbox team to the best of Phil Spencer's ability. Bravo. Now, there are some other people that Satya Nadella does need to remove. But we're tangenting away from talking about the Steam Deck. And then finally, the last bit that I think I left off on was building for Linux. And why building for Linux and Windows simultaneously automatically forces developers to avoid many of the problems that detonate the cost to port or bring a game to a different platform. And I also specifically noted that by building for Linux and Windows simultaneously, you also indirectly wind up being able to very quickly build for any other operating system, any other kernel, any other platform that comes along. Nobody knows what's going to come next. By having a platform-neutral code to begin with that is tested regularly as a platform-neutral code base, you are so much better equipped to immediately target an upcoming platform. It's like Apple's made a lot of changes, but because developers who were working on Linux programs already were testing multi-build targets, they were able to hit the Apple M1 very quickly. And we see that with Android, we see that with Chromebooks, we see that with pretty much every platform. You build cross-platform to begin with, you make sure that your source code compiles to multiple targets before you even release the program to begin with, and you wind up with a cleaner, more maintainable code base. And, okay, so that's the recap. And so now let's talk about the future. And we'll get into these last two dots up at the top, Steam Phone and Steam Display. This last one down here, Steam Build. Now, at this point, this is full conjecture. I'm going to try and lay out the case for why I think that Valve will be releasing a SteamOS or a SteamOS style package that uses a Linux distribution as a base, a KDE Plasma Mobile interface for the phone interface, and has Steam Deck built in as part of the operating system. Alright, so since that's where we're starting, let's click down to our last slide and get a new slide going. And we'll do this one. We'll title this The Android Reversal. And I'm going to state as a fact, not conjecture, and I'm going to be very blunt when I say this. Hardware vendors, software vendors, and consumers no longer trust Google to manage Android. Everybody in the Android ecosystem wanted the previous U.S. political administration, previous U.S. presidential political administration to initiate antitrust and force Android out of Google. Now, I'm stating this as fact. This is not conjecture. This is fact. Hardware vendors from ZTE to Huawei to Samsung to Nokia, and you pick somebody, they've all got some kind of beef with Android. Now, with Samsung, they had Tizen. LG, WebOS. Nokia, Sailfish. Huawei, well, they're still working on, and this is where I do have to look it up, Huawei OS. Huawei is working on what they call Harmony OS. So we'll write down Harmony. Okay. Who else? Well, there's Amazon. They don't even bother to keep Kindle Android is not synced to Google Android, nor does it share an app store. And I could just keep going and going and going about different hardware vendors who have different packages, who have tried different things, and nobody trusts Google to be a proper steward of Android. But there's not exactly another player out there that can match Google. Or is there? Let's do a new slide. Okay, and we'll this one competing with GFT. Now, this stands for competing with Google, Facebook, and Twitter. And the reason why, this is why so many social networks have really failed to take off. It's not that they're perfectly acceptable at allowing the exchange of information. It's not that they're perfectly acceptable at allowing you to find people with the same interest as you. The reason why social networks have failed is that Google, Facebook, and Twitter are more than just their social networks. Google, Facebook, and Twitter offer login services, address services, shipping, location. They offer verification services. Are you a real person? They offer client matching. Are you interested? Wow. Really butchered spelling that one. Okay, client. And when a new vendor comes along, say CloutHub, say Gab, say Rumble, you're not just having to compete on competitive. Wow, I am having a bad time spelling today. Competitive primary software packages for clients. And that includes video, live streaming, chat, linking. We'll just leave it at those four. Video, live streaming, chat. Video uploading, live streaming, chat, linking. Google also has its audio with the YouTube Music. So if you're competing with Google, Facebook, and Twitter, you've not only got to match your login services, you've got to offer a login service for any site with your new account. They've got to offer address services, is login and ship. They got to do verification services, name, birth, client matching, which is advertising, finding interested clients. This is actually a tall order because you're not just with Google, you're not just competing on search. You have to compete with all of the incidental services Google offers in line of that. A case in point would be online storage. Online storage and photography. So if you're Rumble and you come along and you have a video streaming platform, a video upload platform, but you don't compete with Google on any other aspect, or Facebook or Twitter. You don't make it easy for people to use Rumble to log into other websites. You make verification difficult. You don't really do advertising. You don't compete on every single product that the other three already offer. You don't really compete. You don't have a compelling product that will convince people to use your product in place of Google, Facebook, Twitter. They'll keep using Google, Facebook, Twitter, even if Google, Facebook, and Twitter are absolutely horrible. So let's take this and think for a second about Steam. Okay? And so, new slide. Can Valve compete? And this is in reference. Okay, we'll specify this. Can Valve compete with GFT? You think at some point I would just set like a new default slide rather than having to do all this manually? Okay, so on the first aspect, login services. Login services. Valve already offers login services with Steam. Okay, so they're already competitive on there. Address services. Address services. Valve already offers physical product shipping locations. Verification services. Valve already offers verification services with login services. Okay? Client matching. Client matching. Valve already has a robust system to target clients with content they might like. Augmented by curator content and list making. So Valve's actually already really good on client matching as well. Competitive primary software packages. Competitive primary software packages. So let's kind of go down and think about the different ways we use Google or Facebook. Social network. Bare bones, but Steam does have community features that could benefit from writing tools, short links, and push notifications for well, you already have it with the chat system as well. For open chat, we'll phrase it like for push notification for open chat systems. Steam's already got that. Live streaming. Live streaming. Steam already supports broadcasting Steam gameplay. Admittedly, only to other Steam users, but it's there. And that also goes for network attached gaming. Steam already supports in-network attached gaming. Okay, so chat. Well, chat, yes. Linking, as in letting people link to products. Linking, product placement. Well, yeah. Yes, that's supported. Online storage. Not really. Well, if you buy a product on Steam, it's now on Steam, and while your save files may be uploaded to Steam, there's not actually an equivalent to Google Drive or any other drive storage. So this may be some place where Valve could make some money by offering online storage. Potential financial opportunity in offering drive storage between Steam systems. I mean, it's like if you took a picture someplace and you put it on Steam Deck, and then you could upload it or do any kind of editing with it, upload it to a Steam Drive, and then just have that on your desktop where you could then pull it down. Yeah, there's a huge potential there. It's not there, but it could be added, and that kind of goes into photography. I mean, yeah, you can save and share screenshots. And this is outlining why a lot of people think that Valve is the next natural competitor to the Google Facebook trifecta. I'm not sure that was a slip of the tongue. Because if somebody else gets in there, then yeah, Twitter's bye-bye. Well, if Twitter's not already bye-bye based on user counts, so who knows. So yes, on the outside, from a current service-to-service perspective, Valve does already very much compete with Google, Facebook, Twitter. So why don't more people use Steam as a social network? And quite honestly, because I don't think anybody thinks about using Steam as a social network. It's where you go to play games. And to be fair, I've been paranoid for several years about openly identifying my Steam account with an online presence or an online name, simply because I have really bad memories of when I was writing for a gaming site and other players found out that I was writing for a gaming site, that I was being featured on box arts with quotes and quips, and that I was being referenced by the developers. I had a lot of people who figured that if they could somehow play a game with me, I'd mention them and then they'd be big news. Well, it caused the exact opposite effect. Rather than, play the part of a rock star and just roll with it, I dived down and focused more on development and helping developers and doing more testing. So that's, as a social network, Steam's actually already thriving. It has massive communities. By any account, it's already a competitor. So why doesn't anyone ever talk about it? Because no one outside of Steam ever thinks about using Steam as a social media platform, even if it is one. Even if it's already there and already can compete with most of the features that Google, Facebook, Twitter offer. Now, some of that is because you have to be within the Steam network to see this. You can't just, as far as I know, randomly go to somebody's page without being inside the network, whereas with Facebook or Twitter, or for a while even Google Plus, you could link people to content within the social network and they'd still be able to view it even if they didn't have an account. So there is that private-public facing question. Questions of private-public facing content. Okay, so we've kind of positioned, Valve is positioned as a service network to compete with Google, Facebook, Twitter. How is Google ready to go on other fronts, on other primary products? Say, can Valve compete with Gplay? The Gplay Store, of course, is how most applications are added to Android systems, and it's how Valve already competes with game uploads, game downloads, game syncing, and how is that not spelled correctly? And game related connection services. Valve is the default when it comes to matchmaking. Okay? Valve already does downloads. They already do all of the game-oriented features. Valve already does applications in the Steam store. So what doesn't Valve do? Well, Valve currently only supports two architectures. Well, architectures. x86-64 and IA, or architecture, we'll call it i686. Because I don't think that you can actually, I don't have an old Athlon XP that's still working to try on, but I'm pretty sure that even if I somehow got it updated to a 32-bit Windows 7, that I would be able to run very many current games on it. So from a top-down point of view, they're set to compete with Gplay. They're already set to compete with the Google, Facebook, Twitter trifecta. They just need maybe fill in a few edges. But that's where we come to filling in those edges. What isn't offered? And so we'll go to the browser, bring it up, and as you can see on the browser, this is where I was looking up Harmony OS because I couldn't remember it. Here was previous looking up with the RDNA 2. And where I was going was Plasma Mobile. Now, Plasma Mobile is the KDE take on a phone operating system. Now, as we scroll down here, you can already see that there's several applications that KDE already has that already work on pre-existing ARM-based platforms. There's the Plasma camera, there's music players, there's audio players. Okay, you could install VLC, but there's all different sorts of already pre-built, already working applications enough to you can run KDE Plasma on an ARM device and have full cellular connectivity, and it's working today. Now, the number of phones that are actually supported right now are pretty limited, and let's see if I can actually find a quick list. We'll do install, and here we have distributions that are offering Plasma Mobile. Manjaro ARM offers it. OpenSUSE, technically offers it. Postmarket OS, Neon-based reference root FS, and most of these are for the Pine phone, which is an if you're not familiar with who Pine are, and we'll go ahead and bring them up. Pine do a lot of hardware prototypings. So the Pine phone is a quad-core all-winner A64. It's not really anything special to write home about. But it is a fully functional ARM platform, demonstrating that you could, in fact, run any Plasma Mobile KDE system on any other ARM platform, providing you have the correct drivers. Thus, we have the vast bulk of our other aspects of what are we competing with Google, Facebook, and Twitter on. And what are we competing with Android on? What are we competing with Apple on? The basic applications you use every day. Well, most of that's already covered. You can already get a fully functional KDE phone. It's not fast, it's not performative. It's really just a tech demo saying, hey, we got this working. But that also gives Valve an opportunity. Because coming back to here, the Android reversal, nobody trusts Google to properly manage Android. And a big highlight here has been the uh, case in point, Google botched Android Auto with Android 11 and is already working on Android 12 without having even attempted to seriously fix the issues in Android 11. Basically, Google pulling a Microsoft. Basically, Google pulling a Gates Ballmer era Microsoft with a hit and dash development. They're not hitting and running, they're hitting and sprinting. And this is a big problem, especially if you bought a new phone and you were expecting to use Android Auto and then you find that you can't because your Android 11 and Android Auto won't play nicely with your Android Auto car. It's the kind of thing that really breaks consumer trust. And that consumer trust has been broken and broken and broken. I've said it before. Every time Google deprecates a product, the replacement is worse. Google Picasa to Photos. Buzz to Wave to whatever. Play Music to YouTube Music. It's just the list could go on and on. There's a site out there called Goomix, which is comics that were written by somebody who was working at Google, and all of the projects that Google has killed and never issued a proper replacement for. YouTube Music is not a replacement for Play Music, not even in the slightest. Google Photos is not a replacement for Picasa. There's no actual attempt. Every time Google kills a product and they replace it with something else, the replacement is always demonstratively worse on every single point. So, keeping that in mind, keeping that Google has basically copied Microsoft's hit and dash development from several years ago, where problems don't get resolved, you just move on to the next version and say, okay, everyone upgrade. That's not fixing the problem. And that's why you have vendor after vendor who try to field their own competitor. But most of those competitors crash and burn. And part of that is due to application support. Well, and application support is a problem. But here's where we come back to Valve is PC gaming. Easily accounting for a vast majority of Windows and Linux software installations. And we'll leave it at that. Valve is PC gaming. They easily account for the vast majority of Windows and Linux software installations. Every single major developer has a presence on Steam. Every single minor developer has a presence on Steam. Many Android developers and publishers have a presence on Steam. There's like a good case in point. Another cat. Time and Space. What is it? This is where I go back to the browser and look this one up. Another Eden Cat Beyond Time and Space. Now, this is a great RPG. It actually really is pretty one of the best, and you can see here on the page I brought up its own Google Play, its own Steam. Most game developers are already publishing on Steam. So we can now drop the browser window and come back to have a presence on Steam. Most game developers aren't sure they can exist without a Steam presence of some kind. That's how important Steam is to PC gaming. That's how important Steam is to gaming in general. So let me ask this as a question. What happens if Valve takes this market share and mind share and uses new systems to offer existing clients and future clients discounts on Valve's take for meeting certain criteria? What if changing coding practices means Valve only takes 20% of a title's amount rather than 30% or less? Now let's go back up to this slide. And this is where we get to Steam Build. And this is a theoretical, extrapolated, I'm guessing. And we're at 37 minutes. I got time for this. So, and we'll run through what I put down on the slides. Developers and publishers keep optimizing their game releases as separate SKUs with separate budgets, separate sales expectations, separate development staff, and/or separate porting staff. There are separate source code trees. There are separate asset trees. No source repository or main trunk of development exists, and thus there is no way to address future market changes in APIs, ABIs, or the operating system in general. E.g., somebody goes from Windows 7 to Windows 10, the APIs and ABIs haven't changed, but because of the way the operating system works, something else has changed. Maybe now where you stored your files. The file location is still there, but the automatic link to that file isn't there. You haven't changed the API or ABI, but the operating system itself has changed. Okay, and because of this, when porting to a new DirectX, OpenGL, Vulkan, whatever API or whatever new ABI is problematic. OS changes break games. As I proved in a previous live stream, or showed, I won't say proved because there may have been ways to make it work, but Fallout 4 is broken on Windows 10. Fallout 4 works fine, great, better than I could have possibly hoped on Steam Linux using Proton. There is no viable method to build a new client with a new tool chain using the original source code. And this is especially a big problem in Unreal. If you have an older, and we'll pick on Unreal for a second here. And we'll do new slide. Unreality. In the past, it has been difficult to cross-port old Unreal Engine builds into new versions of the Unreal Engine. There have been no or very few tools to bring older games to modern API, ABI, OS systems. Case in point, Unreal Tournament 99 maps could not be imported into UT2K3 mapping system, despite technically being exports of the same underlying engine system, Unreal Engine. So you could create what this means. In other words, content you created on previous Unreal Engines simply is not readily available in the next Unreal Engine product. Now, this was kind of a big problem for mappers, especially who were trying to bring maps from UT99 into UT2K3. Most of the time, they were better off just rebuilding the map from scratch than just importing it, having Unreal Engine, the new version of Unreal Engine, go, hey, I recognize that old format. I'll run a script for how my old self would use it, and then I'll convert that script into something I can understand. Instead of having a translation layer built in, there wasn't one. And that's true of basically all engines. And to some point, there's been an emphasis on proprietary development. But not having access to the original source code, not being able to simply take that old code, run it through a new tool chain, that's always been a big problem in bringing new application forward. There's been tales of developers who have had to go and take CD rips of their retail product launches, and then reverse engineer how they originally made a game to begin with because they didn't have the original source code, and that's bad. So, games require injected hats and/or reverse engineering of the compiled executable just to implement basic API/ABI updates that should have just been addressed through recompiling the source code and publishing a new executable. It should have been that simple, and most of the time it's not. So the theory here is Valve already has a massive compute infrastructure. How big it is, I don't think anyone actually knows. I would go so far as to say that in terms of raw compute, Valve probably can rival Google. That's just what I'll say on that. I think Valve could use their infrastructure to offer a compiling build services to those publishing on the Steam platform, a central source code repository like GitHub or SourceForge, or any other insert your favorite online code hosting solution here. By offering network-attached processing, Valve adds value to the price premium it charges over other distribution services, say compared to Epic Games. And we'll build on this for a second. So we'll copy that bit, and we'll go down here and we'll do new slide, Control V, build it. Case in point, Epic, Desura, Good Old Games, or God Galaxy, Uplay, Origin, Bounty, who remembers that one, and every other publishing service ever don't offer the ability for publishers and developers to build new game clients from the network infrastructure. And let's make our text a little larger. Or ever have not offered the ability for publishers and developers to build new game clients from over the network infrastructure. This gives Valve a huge opportunity for third-party, independent, and other developers by offering comprehensive build services allowing developers network attached processing and network attached storage to their assets, to their game assets, as well as automated building. Okay, this gives Valve a huge opportunity for third-party, independent, and other developers by offering comprehensive build services, allowing developers network-attached processing and network-attached storage to their game assets. Developers could then compile new binaries processed on the Steam system, get the compiler output, and it would likely be faster and more comprehensive by hitting more targets than an in-house build system. E.g., Steam build targets x86 64 Win, x86 64 Linux, x80, or actually we'll go ARM 64 Win, ARM 64, wow, Linux, by default, returning errors for compiling errors for each target. This gives the developer more feedback on what failed, where it failed, depending on what compilers are used. This also gives Valve, they now have technically the source code on their servers. So if an ABI comes along and it's something that can be, let's write this down, Valve now has the source code on their servers, and if an API change comes along, that change can be addressed in a new build, and if the build breaks on an auto trigger, the developer is notified of the problem. Now you've got Valve, who is potentially offering an almost invaluable service by saying, hey, we'll build your game. We'll do that processing. We've already got a computer infrastructure. We've already got a big computer infrastructure. We're already handling all of these multiplayer games. Adding builds to our computer infrastructure is not really a big load increase. So we will build your game. We will let you know what the compiler errors are, and we will also let you edit your code where it exists on our server so that you can fix your code remotely. Or if you want to fix it locally and then upload it, you can do that too. And that comes back to the Steam build service. And by making Windows Linux dual builds mandatory, it pushes developers who, let's say you're an in-house dev. Your game has sold under 25,000 copies. You're pretty much, this is a hobby for you. Making Windows Linux dual builds, and you get to have access to Valve's massive compute structure, and instead of taking 10 hours to compile your game client, it takes 15 minutes. And the only thing you have to do is write clean code so that it automatically compiles to Windows and Linux at the same time. You're probably going to go, that's worth it. That's probably a good, thank you, Valve. That's a good value for the 30% of my target price for my game. And again, we come back to this approach also gives Valve the repository of the game source code, and that way executable compilations can be automated. It also pushes back here on the first slide where we have developers and publishers like EA, Take-Two, Activision, who insist that each game is a separate SKU with its separate budgets, with its separate everything. This pushes developers away from that mentality and into its source code. it needs to be, you can optimize it, but there's a difference between optimizing for a specific platform so that it cannot run on everything else and optimizing for performance. If you're optimizing to a platform neutral API like Vulkan, then you're optimizing for performance. You're not optimizing to a API that only works on one system. This is good coding practices, keeping your code where it can be managed, maintained, but still performative. And that's when we come back to Steam build, and once we have a process in place, where let's say Valve, this is the approach Valve is going to, that they're going to start, justifying, we're taking 30% of your game, we're going to be offering you build services. But, if you take advantage of these build services, and coming back down here to build it, Valve could offer financial incentives. Build a game to all 4 targets using Steam Build, and keep your build updated for 2 years. Valve only gets 20% of your purchase price. 3 years, 15%. 4 years, 10%. And so on down. And you get down to say 6 years, and now for every sale of your game, Valve only takes maybe 2.5% of your purchase price. This approach encourages games as a long-term economic model. If you have a good game, it will still have value in 6 years. If you're still selling your game for $20 in 6 years, and Valve's now only taking 2.5% of your take because you're hitting all the targets on Steam Build, you've got a pretty good deal going there. And that, it gives Valve an incentive to make sure that their system's up to date. It gives you, as a developer, an incentive to keep your systems up to date. What would be the problem with this? All right. Coming back to, we're coming up on 53 minutes, so I kind of want to be ending it off. I really want to talk more about why I think Valve is uniquely positioned to be the next mover when it comes to a mobile device. Why a Steam phone or Steam Deck or Steam Deck OS on a gaming phone could potentially be a big deal if sold directly through Steam. But we're going to be a while going down that rabbit hole, so we're